there was a moment where it was cool to be smart.
Black lives, they matter. No racist!
And it was cool to be aware.
What is woke?
Woke.
Wokeness.
Woke.
Wokeness.
It's a word that honestly goes back generations.
Listen to me.
One of the earliest agreed upon for many scholars instances of people using the word in terms of an overall awareness was lead belly in 1934.
When they go along through that, but stay woke, keep the eyes open.
But like with so many fairly common terms with pretty benign meanings, the word woke, previously defined as wide awake, aware, or socially conscious, has become one of the more divisive terms in our day-to-day existence.
Fighting the woke ideology.
Nobody ever gets canceled for being too woke.
Should children have healthy body parts cut off in pursuit of some woke cult?
People who are in opposition of this level of awareness said that this is where we need to strike.
But is it the word or even the initial intended meaning that is so divisive?
I think the most frustrating part about the outrage against woke culture is that most of the people who are declaring outrage can't define it, don't exactly know what it is.
Is it national security or is it this woke movement?
Or is it the people, activists, and politicians who have found yet another tactic to divide us, all while pushing an agenda?
To renew an America that's strong and proud, not weak and woke.
The people that they go after, the people that they try to marginalize, trans folks, people seeking abortion, undocumented folks, or black people in our community.
This is a mental condition.
All of the elected officials within their state have to do the same thing.
And we proudly consider ourselves the state where woke goes to die. He doesn't even know what the word means, and he has no definition of it.
Unfortunately, the term has been politicized in recent years on both the right and the left.
And I don't like the term woke because I hear woke. You know, it's like just a term that half the people can't even define it. They don't know what it is.
They don't want a woke military.
It's a term that has come to mean a package of policies that can present themselves as quick fixes and it can also be caricatured as out of touch with the realities of most Americans.
Disney is woke. AP African American Studies is woke. Gender lessons are woke. It's pretty hollow, and I think it's just a lazy way of deriding something that you don't like.
For the next 30 minutes, we decided to do our best to take the seemingly intentional division out of the term.
They have no sense of nuance. They have no sense of context. They just know certain buzzwords or certain concepts are out of limits, off limits.
And see if even people who have very different views of the word.
We've had several moments where something that black folk have created, whether it's artistically or academically, has been discovered by the white mainstream, often the right, and then used to generate fear.
The woke movement, CRT, defines the human person based on the hatred of society.
Can find some common ground and a possible path towards compromise and understanding through education.
They say that it's us, and it's not.
This is Fox 29 News Your Stories presents What is Woke?
If you think about it, the question, what is woke, is a question that's asked quite a bit, but rarely gets a real answer. I'm Bill Anderson, so let's give it a shot. What is woke, and how did we get here?
You know, woke has had a very interesting journey of meaning. You know, when the word is first used, when we hear Erykah Badu, for example, say, "Stay woke," on her album, woke was about consciousness. It was about black consciousness.
So let's start there. Most of the scholars, historians, and educators that we spoke to can agree that where we started with the term woke, that's not where we are today.
It's being conscious, being aware of all of the injustices that have happened in this nation. It's a term that originated with black Americans in the 20th century, sort of naming those injustices that were being excluded from the mainstream discourse.
And people have always, used those terms in the literal and figurative ways in terms of, like you said, I'm wide awake. That means I understand, the the lay of the land, the tricks that might, befall me, and I'm conscious.
So if the word began as a rallying cry for consciousness or awareness, why has the definition changed so dramatically? And is it just the evolution of the word, or are there deeper intentions?
I think it's changed because the country is so radically polarized. There, I think, is so much contention around our differences and around our inequalities that people have seized upon the term as a way to oppose certain policies they don't like.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob.
And it became trendy. And I think that's a tipping point in a lot of conversations when it comes to culture shifts.
A renaming advisory committee is targeting 44 elementary, middle, and high schools named after figures it deems problematic.
This pivot, this tipping point.
All you can talk about is money.
I think at that moment, people who are in opposition of this level of awareness said that this is where we need to strike.
This is part of a wokeness movement that seeks to destroy our history.
If you believe Dr. Smith, the early stages of the so-called woke movement were not immediately divisive, but as a movement gained momentum, like with so many things, people were moved to pick sides.
With those people, we're going to turn this into something that it didn't need to be.
Unfortunately, the term has been politicized in recent years on both the right and the left.
Anything that causes them the least amount of discomfort cannot be tolerated for even 1 second.
So I think there's a strong anti-woke majority out there across the country, and I think it's one of the reasons why Florida Stories resonate.
I think especially in educational circles, especially at elite universities, there is such a thing as woke, which is a problem, and it's a problem because it inhibits dialogue and discussion.
The initial meaning then became largely irrelevant and instead became a tool to mobilize political action through emotion and or fear of real or perceived enemies.
Then we're going to be living under an oppressive wokeocracy.
I think people found their team and found their tribe in the anti-woke movement. As you can see, even though a lot of them don't even know what woke means, they're able to define it.
Woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral.
And whatever that banner or that flag is that they need to fly to come together to protect what they think is their way of life, then I think they're doing just that.
And that's where we currently stand, divided over a word or a movement and arguing over who's ultimately to blame.
It's not really about making the world better. It's not really very often about social justice. It's about, let's catch somebody at something.
They're simply parroting what the dominant voices on the right are saying it is. What they know is that it's something that black people are doing, something that brown people are doing, something that LGBTQIA people are doing, and if they doing it, it can't be from me. That's the logic.
So now that we have at least an introductory understanding of the origin and definition of the word woke, we can move into what happens when politicians, corporations, and people in general start to use it for their own purposes.
This is something that happens with language all the time, right? You have a term that arises organically within a community, it moves into another space, another discourse, takes on a different meaning. People latch onto it for their own gain, for their own profit, and it has a new meaning.
Are we going to tear the Washington Monument down? Are we going to rename it the obelisk of wokeness?
I think what woke has become on the left is a way to try to enforce a kind of linguistic and even sometimes intellectual conformity. And that is a problem.
There are numerous examples of words being redefined, and rarely is that new meaning used in a way to unite us.
Suddenly, in the aftermath of George Floyd, the word woke was no longer an internal community word that we use to talk about a heightened state of consciousness. And instead it became, at best, a simplistic, over-reductive criticism of left-wing ideology.
We beat the woke in the schools, we beat the woke in the corporations, and we beat the woke in the halls of the legislature.
Coming out and question things is the way we learn. That's why we have universities in the first place. And I think that unfortunately in some circles we've inhibited that discussion and we've inhibited learning.
The divide has continued to grow, and pretty quickly the impact is being felt through legislation.
We voted to get rid of this left-wing, socialistic, woke agenda that has not only been crammed down the throats of the American people, but crammed down the throats of our military.
A lot of things going on with our military, with the woke and all this nonsense.
Listen to campaign speeches, school board meetings, even protests of businesses and entertainers, and you would think that the woke versus anti-woke debate is top of mind for most of us. But is that actually the case, or is it just a convenient way to push an agenda?
All this stuff is a problem that they're creating in their own minds. They're creating fear among white people in particular, about an outcome that has not happened and will not happen. But by doing that, they create a kind of political momentum that will push them into state houses, push them maybe into the White House again. That's the goal.
It's just become this free-floating signifier that you can attach any meaning you want to. But to me, the answer to that is not to stop using the word. It's to try to devise more precise iterations of the word.
But whether it's a real societal divide or a manufactured societal divide, it is in fact a divide that we all now have to deal with.
I think people found their team and found their tribe in the anti-woke movement. As you can see, even though a lot of them don't even know what woke means or able to define it, they know they have like-minded people who are angry or anxious or afraid or frustrated in similar ways that they are. And whatever that banner or that flag is that they need to fly to come together to protect what they think is their way of life, then I think they're doing just that.
We've explored the word woke, began to see how politicians can use it to push an agenda, but as our guests told us, when people dig in and stop having constructive discussions, the damage can be far-reaching.
Professor Lloyd's career has been about teaching and discussing social justice, but a recent experience that he wrote about left him discouraged about the impact that the so-called woke culture is having.
I encountered a group of students who considered themselves very woke, who were very tuned into social media discourse around politics, and particularly progressive politics, and particularly anti-racist politics. And they were convinced that they had the answers to how to talk about racism and how to talk about all sorts of social justice issues. It came to the point that they weren't interested in engaging with this sort of back and forth discussion that a college class involves, and they eventually wanted to stop the class.
Dr. Smith has also experienced a similar inability for real dialogue.
Unfortunately, I think that we're moving away from what the purpose of these dialogues and debates are designed to produce and to engage us in ways we could see both sides. And I think we've moved away from that.
Black Lives Matter!
And to me, that's wokeness in a nutshell, right? I know what the truth is, and our job is to get people to share the truth. We have the truth, all we need to do is share it. That's not the way I look at the world. I think universities are for investigating truth. They're for inquiring after truth. They're not about promulgating my view of truth or yours.
It's definitely possible that both those who claim to be pro-woke and anti-woke believe that they're doing the right thing, but the result appears to be less constructive dialogue and a lot of finger-pointing.
They ban books, that they shut down curriculum, that they enact legislation so we can't even talk about the stuff. So we can't act like both sides are just disagreeing here. No, one side is committed to silencing the conversation.
If, for example, you're outraged like I am by the removal of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye from Loudoun County, Virginia schools, or, the removal of Art Spiegelman's Mouse from schools in Tennessee and elsewhere. Where were you when the schools were getting rid of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Bill, that book got removed from most English classes. And it's not because of Ron DeSantis or Moms for Liberty.
Now, we've heard the definition. We're living the debate. But if we truly want progress, what now?
We can't use woke with a straight face anymore, not just because the other side has used it and it's corny, but because they've stripped it or emptied it of its original political meaning and intent. So without that, there's no point in using it.
I don't think that means we should stop using it. I think it means we should try to be more careful about what we mean when we do use it.
The whole point is, if we're willing to open up our minds enough to even consider other people's positions and ways of existing in the world, I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. So willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to grow.
We've explored the definition of woke and politicians who've used it as a platform, but one of the things that dominates the so-called woke debate today is when businesses decided it was a good idea for them to get involved.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
It's to be expected that when you have a genuine, movement or even a genuine martyr, right? They're gonna sell mattresses and, use cars to celebrate their legacy. We have to understand that's just part of the terrain. We live in America. There's going to be capitalism, there's going to be consumerism, there's going to be propaganda.
We started to see businesses taking a stand with calls for diversity and inclusion following the movements around the George Floyd protests.
Corporations don't have feelings. They have interests. And whenever you see a movement emerge that is popular, you will see corporations jump on it. You saw companies investing in Black Lives Matter, investing in woke culture, investing in left-wing movements because it was good for business. And at the moment where it was no longer good for business, you also see companies who have been caught not honoring their pledges, not paying up, or now distancing themselves from the very thing that got them name recognition in the first place.
But just as some pushed for an alleged more woke business presence,
Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever.
Like with this entire debate, some pushed back with the term woke washing.
Well, corporations exist to make money. That's their purpose, and to make money for themselves and for their shareholders, right? So any decision they make about these subjects, you have to refract through that lens. That's their job. Indeed, that's their responsibility.
I don't want to go into a restroom where there's a man next to me washing my hands.
Which begs the question of whether these political stances are an area too divisive for businesses to even be involved with.
A woke stock looking for a bottom. Just look at this chart.
I don't see Bud Light using a trans influencer as some sort of horrible, woke imposition on American culture and society. I just see it as a poor business decision.
And if businesses are ultimately guided by profit, we may be wasting our time, expecting them to be a major part of the whole woke debate.
A lot of big companies, they ran toward quote-unquote woke culture, and then once there was political backlash, they ran away. Corporations are going to always do that. They're always going to go where the money is. They're always going to be thermometers rather than thermostats. They're always going to respond to the temperature, never change it.
Okay, exhale, I get it. That was a lot, but it speaks to how divided we currently are as a society surrounding the word woke and how far we still have to go. I'm Bill Anderson, and like with all of our specials, we love to hear from you. Pro, con, or neutral, hit me up on social media and share your thoughts, because together we can be better. And on behalf of the whole team who helped put this special together and all of our guests, thanks so much for watching and have a good one.